It's the Cold Beer Surf Club.
We met back in the day through Greg Teal.
Yes.
Because you had just started your podcast.
Yes.
And I did it with you. So it's kind of serendipitous that here we are.
Yeah.
And you're the first victim of this podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course.
Yeah, it's rad.
Thanks for coming.
I'm in the hot seat. I always say I love being a guest on somebody else's show because I don't have to do any preparation. You know?
Yeah.
Just come in and answer questions.
Well,
Talk.
I feel like I probably didn't need too much prep because I at least knew you enough to feel comfortable sitting here and hanging out. But no,
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. But yeah, it's funny. So you're a pro podcaster.
Oh yeah, I'm an elder statesman of the scene
for sure.
Yeah.
But no, I mean I'm stoked, Chris. This is gonna be fun. But I think maybe we're both from Santa Barbara. I don't know if everyone knows that. I didn't know that about you for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
And then so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about just kind of growing up there and what the music scene was like, and see if there's any kind of synonyms with the surfing scene. But I really want to hear about your take on like the music scene in Santa Barbara, because I feel like it's pretty weak sauce now, but I feel like when you grew up, it wasn't as much.
It was really good. I mean, honestly, it was better than I realized at the time. And going way back to before I was even a musician, like I have two older brothers who were already like had great record collections, and we're just like in our house for whatever reason, like we were just obsessed with music in the way that people are obsessed with sports or whatever. It was just kind of like everything, you know? And my brothers, by the time I was old enough to, be sort of like aware of anything, had like, tons of great records. And my earliest memories are just kind of looking through their record collections. And I have this kind of image of Santa Barbara when I was real little, just like in the 70s, of just, like the Stones, Some Girls, records like that, just kind of being on at everybody's house, and everybody's parents were kind of shaggy and, smoking pot. And it was at that time, and there was a lot of music around, whatever it was. And, but then when I got a little older and started playing and started going to shows and then playing in bands, I mean, it just seemed like all my friends had bands. So there was just so many options to see live music. You just were at gigs all the time. And it wasn't like fancy gigs. It was like keg parties. And you'd go out to IV and somebody would be playing in a carport or something like that. Or, your friends would have a kegger at their house and your other friends' bands would be playing. So there was just a lot of that. And then my band that I was in a lot of different bands in high school and stuff, but we just kind of worked our way up through that, like playing parties and random stuff. And the Red Barn, I don't know if you ever went to the Red Barn. That was probably maybe a little before your time, but the Red Barn was like a venue out in Isla Vista that you could rent from the city. And there was just shows there like pretty much all the time, every weekend or whatever. So there was that kind of stuff. And then little by little, we would get a gig in a bar, and a gig at like, what was it called, Oscars, or there was Club Iguana, and there was Carnival. And there was like all these people kind of in our age range, like in high school. And then there was sort of the next tier up. And at a certain point, I started playing with a band called Rat Pack with like Matt Rat and Sean Murphy and Alpo Duncan. And they were all maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 years older than me. So they were sort of at that next age level. And then there was sort of the group that was a little beyond that, and there were a lot of really good players around. Like when we were kids, we thought they were all square or whatever, because we were going to shows in LA and, going to see Poison and LA Guns or what, that kind of stuff. Like that was like, this is like, would have been in like the mid 80s or whatever. Yeah. And from that point on, like pretty much from like 8th or 9th grade, like I was just had this like fixation that I am going to get through high school and move to LA, and it's going to be rock and roll, and I'm going to go off and just, chase that thing down. That I think I definitely wasn't like in the moment and appreciating how great things were locally. You know what I mean? How great that sort of like that scene was to just go out and fall on your face and figure out how to be a band. I'll tell you, like years ago, we put together a Foo Fighter documentary. And so when we were working on that, I went and tracked down all the sort of video footage that I could find of my high school bands. And I had a band called The Lost Kittens with my friends. And we had a lot of different versions of that band with a lot of different people. But I found my first gig, video of it, 9th grade talent show, and then another gig we did at like Oscars, and then a gig we did right before we moved to LA. And the progression, it's maybe over the course of like 4 years or something. It's like the first 9th grade talent show, it's just unlistenable. It's like, it's just noise, and we're trying to play some Kiss songs or whatever, and you can't even kind of tell what it is. And then it's like a year later, and it's like, you could kind of recognize some songs, but it's pretty stiff and janky. And then by the end of it, it's like, we're kind of playing for real, you know, and the arrangements are crazy, and it's like a 5-minute guitar solo in every song and all that kind of stuff.
All the fun stuff.
Right, which is kind of like of the era, you know, but you could really see how we had developed really quickly, you know, over the course of a few years, just like, you know, just doing it all the time. And then we moved to LA and figured out that whole scene had like died by then. But we were just far enough away to sort of not realize that.
Yeah,
you know?
that's crazy.
Like, that's a good thing about Santa Barbara. I feel like growing up there, you're like just far enough away from LA or any, you know, big metropolitan area that it feels like a small town when you're living in it, and you sort of, you know, you're just a little removed, so you can just kind of just grow and, you know, undisturbed and with your friends and just kind of in that little incubator up there.
Totally. Yeah. Kind of a little festering scene up there.
Totally.
Huh? That's crazy. I mean, growing up, when I grew up, I didn't feel like there was any sort of music. I mean, I had a few friends who played in bands, but not, and they were good too, but there wasn't really like, they'd play a little house party or something, but it wasn't really consistently. And I felt like every time something would start going, some wheels would fly off, or that place that they could play and party was no longer something there. So it never really got rolling. And I guess I feel like music's changed so much too. I mean, since you grew up prior to now, it's like DJs and like people who want to listen to rock and roll or blues or country or punk rock is, you know, it seems like it's a bit of a dying breed. But I feel like maybe now it's kind of making a little bit of a resurgence.
It seems like the 90s is making a resurgence right now. Yeah, but it's interesting. I always feel like there must be a scene somewhere of something I just don't know about because I'm too old. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be some version of that for kids somewhere, and I'm just not hip to it. And maybe it's like you said, maybe it's like DJs or something. I don't know.
I know.
It is interesting though, like coming out of like that time in the 80s. I mean, you think of all the great bands that came out of Santa Barbara, were connected to Santa Barbara, like Lagwagon came out of that. And all those guys were in different bands, and then it kind of came together as Lagwagon and went on to be the band that they've been. Like, you know, you had like Toad the Wet Sprocket came out of that time. Like Dishwalla, Summer Camp, like so many, Nerf Herder, like all these bands that went on to make tons of records and tour the world and do this, you know, and do it for real. Like it's pretty great. It
is pretty well.
Makes me happy, like that most of my friends from those days are still making music and still playing and still in it, you know?
Oh, yeah. So when you were growing up in Santa Barbara and musically, like what did you know that was what you wanted to do from a really young age?
Not really. It's like there was a like my friend, I had a couple friends of mine that lived up there that were the first people I ever played music with. And they moved down to LA like halfway through 8th grade. And I went down and visited them that summer in LA. And I'd already been going to shows, like coming down to go to shows for a little while. And so sort of seeing that like club scene and going to shows like the Troubadour and the Country Club and the Whiskey and the Roxy and all that sort of stuff. And I was like into it just as a fan, but I could barely play guitar at that point. So I wasn't thinking about like this was something that I was going to do. And my brothers were really good. And I think at that age, I kind of had that thing of like, you know, I'm never going to be good enough to do it like they are, that kind of feeling, you know.
And what was that, like what age kind of were you at that point?
Like, yeah, like 8th grade, so whatever that is, like around 13, 14, something like that. But there's that summer between 8th and 9th grade, I always think of that as like the time that it kind of clicked for me. I came down to visit my friends, and I just remember walking all over Melrose and like going into all those funky shops like Aardvark's and Renee's and Retail Slut and all that Long Hair Rocks, not Long Hair Rocks, but whatever, just all those crazy shops that used to be on Melrose, and picking up like Bam Magazine and their flyers for all these bands. And it just seemed really exciting. There's this rock and roll scene that was just like kicking off right about then. And I remember thinking like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And we formulated this plan like, okay, you go back to Santa Barbara and you take guitar lessons from Steve Miles at Fancy Music, and he's going to teach you how to play like, for real. And I totally went home and did that. Like signed up, took guitar lessons from Steve Miles, and he taught me how to play lead guitar, and it was just off to the races, man. It was like that. And that's when I really, but it's funny that you think about it. Maybe there's a parallel for you, coming up in surfing. Like, I was obsessed with the idea of making it, but you don't know what the fuck that means when you're 14. You don't know what that really looks like. You have this kind of this MTV image of, I don't even know what it was that I imagined, like being on a big stage and, drinking champagne with beautiful girls and driving a Lamborghini. I don't like it, just all that kooky stuff. And
yeah.
Many years down the road, when you finally kind of get some success, it just doesn't look like that at all. I mean, playing on a big stage, I guess that, but the rest of it, not so much.
Yeah, I guess for me, surfing growing up, I was so into it, and all I wanted to do was surf. So I never, there was not really a point where I was like, oh, I want to be a pro surfer. It was more almost, I want to figure out how I can do this for a job so that I don't have to do anything else.
Right.
And that transition into like, okay, well, that's contest and being a pro surfer. And I didn't, like Sam, I didn't know what that was going to look like for a long time, It's interesting because in Santa Barbara, and maybe this is a key difference with surfing, you have like the surf industry is there, like, especially with like a company like Channel Islands. Do you have, like, I always felt like I had to leave. Like that, I just wanted to get out and see the world. And obviously, you've had to travel a ton in your surfing career. But like, did you have that same feeling of like, I have to leave here to go do the thing for real that I want to do, or were you kind of like connected early, like with some of the people in the surf industry proper? Yeah, that's interesting. It's a good question. I'd say some of both, because it was nice. I mean, because the surf industry, like the focus on the surf industry is probably more down here in like, Southern California, San Clemente, Orange County. So that was way more of like the hype and the attention on like the next kids coming up, like Kolohe and Andrew Doheny. I was kind of in the mix with those guys, but since I was from Santa Barbara, no one really knew who I was or knew that I'd surfed all right or anything. Whereas they were already talking about those guys as these are the next guys, So I definitely felt like I needed to, at some point, get out of there to get more, like, I guess, recognition or whatever, to be more on the up and coming of the surf scene. But luckily, I think there was a map already in Santa Barbara of like, Bobby, Tom, Dane was, in there, Channel Islands, Sex Wax, Matt Moore, there was like enough of this surf history there to where it was like, oh, good surfers could come from here.
Right.
So when I was a little bit older and this was like, okay, I want to, I think I want to start doing contests and stuff. Then it was like, all right, I got to go down, and you had to kind of prove yourself in the amateur contest down here, Orange County and stuff, and surf against the best guys. So it was definitely a smaller pool, kind of north of like, maybe Ventura and north. It was a smaller pool. Whereas there's more good kids down here. Right. But I never really had that feeling. I've always been a homebody. So I was never someone who's like, I got to get out of here. I was like, I don't really want to leave Rincon to go down and surf Huntington,
Right.
So that was kind of a bit of a struggle for me, really, especially as I got older. And I was like, oh, I got to leave home to go surf crappy waves. But it's so good here. The surf scene's rad. All my friends and the waves are good. And I love surfing here. But I kind of had to at one point decide like, okay, I'm going to commit to time away from home to make this dream come true.
When you first were on the tour in the earlier years, would you go home between contests, or do you have to, with like sponsor commitments, are you going from a contest in Australia to a boat trip somewhere to do photos to some other thing? Like, are you like, when you go out, are you gone for most of that season?
It was always a little different when I was doing the QS and like really, and still doing a lot of free surf trips and like filming for movies and stuff. And that was when the industry was a lot more was happening.
Right.
So there was more obligations for like fun stuff.
Right.
It was what I wanted to be doing.
And that's one of the big parallels with music and surfing, I think, nowadays, is the way that bands or artists and surfers have to be their own like content generating brands or what, you know, like
totally.
It wasn't like that back in the day. I don't think it was like that when you first became a pro, right?
No, I mean, I rode for Hurley and it was like, okay, cool. You're going to do this Hurley thing and we're going to take you here and you're going to do this. It was much more like driven by the brands and the magazines.
You're right.
And then someone who was making a surf movie maybe. So yeah, I would be juggling like all that stuff and kind of going, but I would always try to come home when I could versus, yeah, I mean, I'm sure back in the day it was more like, okay, you're in this huge band and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm along for the ride, right?
Yeah, well, like it was really like when I was in No Use for a Name before Foo Fighters, like when those tours would be much, much longer. You'd be out for a much longer time than like, say, what we do in the Foo Fighters now. Like, you know, we're all middle-aged and married and have kids and stuff. So like at a certain point in our touring, like that evolved to be more family friendly, you know what I mean? But when you're young, like when I first started touring, I didn't want to go home. I was like, I would be it was like summer camp was over when the tour ended, you know what I mean? It's like I can be out there playing shows and getting free beer and, you know, traveling the world, or I can go home and sit in my apartment, you know what I mean? Not that you were really just sitting around in your apartment, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I just loved it. I was so into, I just wanted to be on the road so bad because, like, I was also like, I felt like in my immediate friend group, like my other friends were making records and hitting the road before me, so I felt that like I almost felt like I got to it a little late, you know, and I was like wanting to make up for lost time.
Catch up.
Yeah, because I would see like Joey from Lagwagon or my friend Joe Sib that was in a band called Wax, and they'd be like coming back from, you know, Joey would come back from Europe and be talking about like how these crazy big shows over there in Germany and stuff, and I'd just be like, whoa, what is that like? I want to do that so bad, you know. I'd just be green with envy, you know.
That sounds so fun. So what age were you when you kind of got to your first major tour? So, I mean, I'm sure there's all like the evolution, right? I mean, you're at one point probably in a van just running up and down any gigs you could get in California or something, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, you know, when I moved to LA when I was 18 and played around LA for a while and never was in anything. It was never in a band that made records, you know? And then I moved up to San Francisco and got a job at Fat Records. And then that's how I joined No Use for a Name. And so that was the first time I ever went on tour I had gone on tour a little before that, roading for my friend's band for 1 month-long trip. And I loved every minute of it. And I wasn't even playing. I was just humping gear and driving the van and stuff, you know what I mean? But I just, like, we didn't travel when I was growing up, you know? Like, my family didn't really have any money and we didn't go anywhere. And you know, luckily we lived in paradise, so it was fine. But I just had such a thirst I just wanted to see anywhere. So, like, just driving across the country, I didn't care where I was. You know, I'd go to Albuquerque. I'd be like, whoa, fucking Albuquerque, this is so rad. You know, no way. So that first tour I ever did, just roading, I really got the bug. I just loved it. And then it was a few months later that I joined No Use. And so I would have been about, I think I was still 23, maybe just before I turned 24 when I joined that band.
And was that like straight full speed touring?
Total. I mean, literally, I joined, I think I auditioned for them on a Thursday and we left for tour on Monday.
No way.
And the first show was in Atlanta. So we drove across the country and me and Tony, the singer, just sat in the van, like sort of reviewing the songs. Cause you know, it was literally like the exact same scenario with when I joined Foo Fighters. Like joined a band with a bunch of people I didn't know and had to learn like, you know, 25 songs or so. Real fast and just go hit the road. And so just kind of did it by doing it, which was pretty much mirrored the Foo Fighters. You know, I auditioned a couple times for Foos, sort of officially got the gig on a Sunday, did my first rehearsal the next day. We rehearsed that week, did a gig, I want to say on the Thursday or Friday or something like that, you know, and then left for tour that Monday and was just kind of off to the races, you know.
Is it weird, like at that point, are you like, oh my God, this is no use for a name. Like, I love this band. Like, are you, or is it just like, oh yeah, this is
oh
like
man,
an opportunity, you know what I mean?
It was like dream come true. Like,
Okay.
like right where I wanted to be in that to me, like that was like the scene that I was like into,
For us, that's like qualifying for the CT.
Totally.
You're like, all right,
Yes.
this is what I've been wanting to do my
Yes.
whole life.
Yeah.
It's on.
Yeah, totally. Because you think about it, like music had evolved a lot in those years. Like by the time I moved to LA at the beginning of '90, like the whole kind of like rock and roll scene was pretty much cashed out, and this new sort of alt rock thing was bubbling up, but hadn't quite, like come to be what it was just before like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that stuff had blew up. So it was this sort of like weird in-betweener moment where you didn't really know what was happening and the scene was pretty dead. And because when I was a kid going to shows in LA, like you could see bands without a record deal be packed to be sold out, and there was it was a real buzz around that world back then, and it was just totally gone by the time I moved to LA. And there were all these bands around that were kind of like a hybrid of like Jane's Addiction meets the Chili Peppers. That was kind of the thing that was happening around LA at that time, but nobody was really like just was like there was no, I don't know. It's weird when a scene dies. I don't know where the people go, you know what I mean? Because you go from like all the gigs are just packed out to like none of the gigs seem to be packed out at that point. And it was just weird. Things were evolving and my tastes were evolving. And over the years I had gotten more and more into like Bad Religion and No Effects and all that. That kind of thing was taking flight, And so by the time I joined No Use in '95, like that scene was just in full swing. It was like at its apex, with like Lagwagon and Good Riddance and all the bands, Fat Records and Epitaph and all that stuff was just booming,
Sick.
and it was just rad. It just felt like, I was so stoked to get to go do it for real, to go play. It's so different as a player. I'm sure it's the same as surfing. Like when you're working away at it, but you're not in a touring thing, you're rehearsing with your band and you have a gig every now and again. And it seems like you're doing it all the time. And maybe to some extent you are, but it's not the same thing as night after night after night playing at that level of intensity. And especially that scene was like, it was athletic. You're jumping around, you're sweating, and it's a little packed thing, and you're playing. And I used to play really aggressive, and my hands would be all cut up, and you'd be bleeding. And it'd just be like, it was just gnarly. And it takes you to new levels quickly, just that day in and day out thing of it. So, yeah, I just couldn't have been happier.
Oh, yeah.
Stoked, yeah.
That's cool. I think surfing wise, it's relatable because when I got on the tour, it's all of a sudden you're with the best of the best of the best.
Right.
And you're surfing with them every day. And then you have to surf a heat against them. So you're just constantly trying to get better, keep up, or level yourself up, whereas now that I'm not competing, like I still surf all the time, but it feels so different to paddle out at home. And you're like, oh yeah, cool. Like maybe there's a couple of people out, maybe there's no one out or whatever, and you're just surfing for yourself, and it's really nice. But I definitely, that feeling of like always going out and being amidst like the best surfers around it's pretty crazy, and it keeps you so sharp,
right?
Yeah, and fired up to keep getting better.
I remember like going out when we toured with like No Effects or something, or if you'd go do the Warped Tour and you'd see how all the other bands that were bigger than your band did it. And even just some of like the nuts and bolts stuff of how they tour, I got to get a road case for my amp, and oh shit, I got to get a tuner, or you got to set up your guitar, like all those little tricks of it, you know what I mean? That like it's like the difference between being I guess it's like that sort of like the professionalism or whatever,
Yeah,
totally. It's interesting,
and just having to be on it night after night. I mean, what's that? I always wonder when I watch a show and like that energy that's on the stage and that we feel as the audience too. And like you felt at a show, and I'm sure when you're up there like playing and then what? I'm always like, when you walk off the stage, then what? Right. I'm like, how do you just?
I think you just explained why musicians are such fuck ups and surfers too. Cause that's exactly it. Like, I mean, God, that's a deep subject right there. You just, you keep chasing that feeling.
And
that's, like we talked about a little bit before we started, like, you know, I've been sober for a long time, and touring was very different when I was younger because of exactly that, because you'd be partying before the show, you'd party during the show, then after the show, then it really ramps up. And then the next day, you feel like shit all day, and then it's like that thing of when the show, you know, about an hour before the show, maybe you crack a beer and, like, you know, you start to get in the thing, and then you play the show, and it's exactly that. You're like, raw, and you're back, and then you know, rinse, repeat. You just do that, you know, for 6 weeks straight or whatever, and then you come home, you're like,
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it is. I mean, surfing's changed so much since, I mean, I've been doing it, and even before, I'd imagine, before I was on tour, but I guess I can relate a little bit. It just seems like music, it's so much more condensed into like the concert and that night, and then whereas surfing, I guess it's spread out a little bit more. But it is, like, I remember coming home, you know, you get done with the event and it's like, oh, cool. Like it's been such an adrenaline, you know, maybe you did well. If you do shitty, it's like, it's not as cool. But like when you do well, or the waves are good, and like this energy and this feeling, and then you all go out and you party, and then it's like, okay, afterwards, just like done. The adrenal burn from like the week of physically and mentally, and then like, you know, maybe a night or two of partying. And then I remember sometimes coming home and just being like, what do I do now? Like,
Right.
I get back to Santa Barbara, and like there's no surf in the summertime. I sit around, I'm bored. Like,
nobody's high-fiving me right
like,
now.
I don't have a real job. Like, what do I do? Everyone else is doing shit and working, and like, so what do I do now? You know?
Yeah.
And,
well, it is a funny thing. Like it's, I'm sure it's the same on the surf tour as it is like on a rock and roll tour. Like the night that you're in town, that's the circus is in town, and that's everybody that comes out to the show. That's their night to go fucking cut loose, you know. And then you're traveling, and you know, you wind up, if you're doing it for a long time, you have friends everywhere you go, and so that becomes, you know, that's the thing. It's like that's everybody's night to go for it, but for you, that's every night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, I mean, we would go to like, you know, the US, we go down to the US Open. It's just like a raging party for a week, you know, and there's girls and everything, you know, a different thing every night, and you can go to any of them for free and drink for free and whatever. But like, I got a heat the next day. I probably shouldn't do this, you know, whereas I think back in the day, everyone was just like, no, we're going to go for it all week. And, you know, I think now it's like, the level of surfing's gotten higher, and everyone takes it more professionally. So everyone sort of like went more that way because you kind of had to.
Right.
It's pretty hard to show up and surf a heat hungover when someone else isn't, and they're gonna smoke you.
Right.
But yeah, I always sort of tripped on that, because you go to France, and there's all these people that have come to party and watch the event for a week, and you like go out to dinner, like, whoa, like that looks pretty fun over there. So it definitely took a certain level of self-control.
Yeah, and it's hard when you're young because you don't really have any self-control.
Yeah.
And you're out there, and it's all new, and you haven't learned those lessons yet. I can't surf my heat very well if I'm hungover. Yeah. You just got to learn that the hard way, you know?
Totally. I think that for me, and like going home and kind of feeling bored, that led me to get into other things, because I was like, okay, like I can't surf it's flat in Santa Barbara a lot.
Right.
I don't want to sit around bored, you know? So I got into playing guitar and, you know, fishing and being on the ocean. Like I was always kind of hungry for other interests because I couldn't surf all the time.
We And almost seems what I really want to talk to you about though is your garden.
Oh yeah, that was kind of same thing, you
right?
know?
Yeah,
yeah.
We built a COVID garden in my yard, not realizing my yard just does not get any sun.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, you need sun to grow things.
Totally.
So I've had some really anemic gardens in the last few years. But I look at your garden on your Instagram, I'm like, oh my God, how's he doing that? It's amazing.
I grew up my grandma garden and my mom garden, so it was kind of a family thing always for us as kids. Like we lived on a little bit of land, just like, you know, a couple acres.
Yeah.
And so we always had room for a garden, and my grandma and mom were all into it. So when I was a kid, I was all into gardening and growing all this stuff. And then that didn't seem too cool when I was, you know, like young and surfing and traveling. And then I got to a point where I'd come home and I was like, I need something to do. And all my friends were working on these farms, and they actually all played music. That was like my group of friends that played in bands and played music.
Oh, really?
We're kind of like living and working on these farms and all playing music. So that kind of, I was playing with them a bit, and then they were all, and I was like, I should start the garden again. So that kind of got me fired back up on gardening.
So do you have like garden skills now? I'm assuming you're not just like throwing some seeds in the ground and letting it go wild. Like, are you in there cultivating the land and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't do too much. I think we're lucky we have good soil, and then I bury all my fish carcasses in the garden, and that's like an old Chumash trick.
Right.
It's like natural, it's fertilizer. It all breaks down and super good for the plants. That's about it. I don't know, like a little bit of cover crop or I'd ask them just like, oh, what do I do? Like, do I mulch and keep the weeds down? And oh yeah, that holds more moisture. So I'd just ask them questions.
Interesting.
I had it pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I think we just have a pretty good climate too. Yeah. It's fun.
I had a funny thing where, like I said, I've had some very anemic gardens in the last few years. And so this year I was like, I'm just going to plant some flowers. Because I can't really grow any food here. It just always sucks when it comes up because it doesn't get enough sun, and the tomatoes are small and not very tasty and all that sort of thing. So I just put a bunch of flowers in there, and they're all starting to come in, and it was starting to look good. And our landscaper showed up one day and thought they were weeds and cleared the whole thing out. So I came home one day, and my garden beds were completely empty. I was like, what just happened? They're like, oh, we thought they were weeds.
Oh,
like,
no.
What? It's finally working.
Yeah. That's so funny. I was going to ask you, because I wanted to know when you got into surfing. And I was wondering if almost for you, like surfing was similar to kind of those other things I mentioned for me, where it was like I needed something else to do.
Yeah, it's funny. And it's one of, I don't have a lot of like regrets in life, but this is definitely one of them. If I have any, it's that I didn't get into surfing younger. I didn't really start surfing until I was in my 20s. And I look back on my childhood and I don't even understand it because I grew up at the frickin' beach. And I grew up boogie boarding and body surfing, and I had friends that surfed. And I remember being in high school and my friends going like, dude, just take the board out, like go get away, and being like, and I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't start surfing until I was like in my mid-20s. Actually, when I was in No Use for Name, the first time I ever think I like really surfed was our drummer, Rory, surfs, and he took me out up in Santa Cruz once. And I was living in San Francisco, and so I went and bought a longboard and went down to and surfed Pacifica once or twice with Chris Rest from Lagwagon, who was in RKL back in the day. And it was, I'm sure you've surfed up there, but it was so cold, and I had this ratty old wetsuit on with holes in it that I was like, this is not very fun. It's just too cold for me. And so I left that board. I moved to New York, and I left that board at my brother's apartment down here in LA, my brother Scott. And every time I would come through LA, I would go grab it and go just try to figure out how to surf, And I was like, I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't know like about how tides worked and affected. Yeah, I didn't know that like some days the swell's 1 to 2 and some days it's 4 to 6. Like I just wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. And I would just go to like Manhattan Beach or, and County Line, and one day it'd be great. And I'd be like, oh my God, that was the funnest thing. I'd come back the next day, there'd be no waves. I'd be, what happened? This was so good yesterday. And just sort of through just trial and error, and then touring, if we'd be in like Australia or Hawaii or somewhere that there'd be waves, I'd just go surf. And little by little just sort of got to know people. And how it is when you get into something, you sort of like have that like, that like you're almost too stoked about it. You know what I mean? You just want to learn everything about it. I kind of went through that like probably, 10 years later than everybody else did or something, you know what I mean? And then and just started to figure out which of my friends surfed and sort of gravitate to them, and just started surfing a ton, and it's just, I don't know. It's there are obviously a lot of parallels there between music and surfing, but for me, they're so disconnected because surfing is like, it's just not something I have any ambition with. It's just something that I just enjoy, and I like being sort of cut off from the world out in the water, and I don't wear an Apple Watch, and I don't want to get fucking texts or, when I'm out there. And I love that about surfing, where it's like, music is obviously my first love, and I love it, but it's work, and it's ego, and it's money, and it's got all that stuff kind of tied into it for me, I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's just the reality. That's like what I do. But man, yeah, it's like you were saying about needing something in your life that sort of gets you just some other thing to sort of free yourself with. I mean, it's the best thing, like on tour, when you can have those days on tour, and I've done them in a small way and I've done them in a big way, like where you like just being in Australia on tour, like where you're surfing and playing shows and sort of bouncing between that. It just puts you in such a good, like, it just, I don't know, it just just gets you right. I don't know. There's just that thing about the ocean. It's like somehow it just kind of heals. It just kind of puts everything together, like those days for me, like there was there's a bunch of days down in Australia, but there was the last show we played in Brisbane. I went and surfed with, you probably know Jay Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
Went and surfed with Jay at Rainbow Bay, right there, right next to Snapper, and just like had like just the funnest day, and you're just like sun-baked and surfed out, and then took a little nap on the way to the show, and then get to the show and take a shower and play the gig, and it's just perfect. Like I just felt like I was just smiling from ear to ear the whole time, just because of that.
That sounds like a damn cool day.
Yeah, but I do that in little ways too, like with my solo thing. Like we played up in Half Moon Bay not too long ago, and just get some fun waves, and the promoters all tied into the surf world up there, and when those two things can overlap in like in that way, it's great.
Yeah,
kind of the best. Those
cool.
are the best days on tour.
Well, even just recently when you played Santa Barbara,
yes.
and you were like texting me, you're where are you surfing at? I'm like, dude, he's got like playing the bowl tonight, isn't that like, I don't know,
Yeah.
You're like, where let's go surf.
How good was that day, by the way? And I had driven up the day before, and I went and surfed Rincon on the way up, and it was just like one of those fun little days. Wasn't that crowded. I think the swell was maybe just starting to fill in. It was good, and you could get waves. And then like that day that we surfed, it was like, Bobby Martinez there, you and your brother are there, and it was like everything just lined up. It's just like, it's funny those kind of days, and I've had a few of them. It's like you're watching a surf movie, a surf edit in real time, watching all you guys do your thing. It's exciting, it's inspiring.
Oh, cool! It was a fun day. I got to surf with you and Bobby and my brother, and then go watch you guys play the bowl.
Yeah,
that was so fun.
That whole day, and then having like Tom Curren come down and everything. I have that great picture from backstage. I was like, man, that is look at that lineup, man. That is strong, generational 805 surf action right there.
Yeah, that was really cool. It must be wild. I mean, I know you told me you guys played. I'm going like off of. I wanted to ask you something else, but since we're talking about it, you guys have played the bowl before as Foo Fighters, right? But it's been a while.
It has been a while, and the only time I actually saw the Foo Fighters there before I was in the band.
Oh, no way.
On the first album tour, they played the bowl with Ween and Jawbreaker were the support band.
Sick.
So yeah, so that was the second time I ever saw them. But and then years later when I was in the band, we played around, I want to say like 2006 when we did we were doing kind of an acoustic tour. And so it wasn't a regular show. It was like a big expanded band and mellow versions of all the songs. It was really fun. It was great, but it was a different kind of energy. It wasn't that like, gung, 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 gung. It wasn't that thing, but it was great. And I never thought we were going to play the bowl again. Just cause we usually just play LA and then you play San Francisco and don't hit the markets in between. And I saw that gig pop up on my calendar because we have like a band calendar, and it had popped up way earlier in the year. And a friend of mine, Dave Hanasek, I don't know if you know Dave.
I think I do.
He works at KJE, in town.
Okay.
And maybe I heard about it from him. I think I heard about it from him. He called me and was like, dude, I heard you guys are playing the bowl. I was like, what? I don't know anything about that. Let me check. And I called our manager, and at that time it was a toss-up. It was either going to be there or it was going to be like in Paso Robles or something. And I was like, come on, dude. It's hometown. We got to make this happen. And there was a radius clause issue with one of the festivals we were playing. Like if you play like a festival, you can't play anywhere near it, within whatever the radius clause thing. And they were able to work it out, and I was so stoked. I mean, that was honestly like the a top 5 Foo Fighter gigs ever for me. Just perfect. Just like what a perfect night. You know?
The bowl is epic. I mean, it must be just crazy going from playing. I mean, because most of you guys are playing stadiums now, right? I mean, like how many thousands
shows.
of seats? You know, like
sometimes it's stadiums, sometimes a lot of times it's festivals or arenas or sheds or they're all the it's usually like a lot bigger than that. So that's like a nice. It's funny to think of that as being like an intimate show, but it kind of is in its way.
It feels intimate being in the crowd, but just to go home and play that show, like I mean, all the way at the pretty much the peak of musical career must feel pretty rad.
It felt pretty good.
Yeah.
I tell you, the moment that there's a lot of moments just like looking out in the crowd and seeing my friends and my family and all that stuff and having all my kids there and everything. But Dave was talking about when we first met, because his band had played in Santa Barbara back in the 80s, and Rat Pack, the band that I was in, opened up, and they actually spent the night at the drummer for Rat Pack's house that night, and he was sort of talking about that, and I don't remember exactly what was being said, but right in that moment, I looked out in the crowd and kind of like up a ways in the seats, I saw a dude sitting there in an RKL t-shirt. I was like, that is so perfect right there. You know what I mean? Like, classic. Only in Santa Barbara are you going to see that. You know?
Do you get nervous still ever going on stage for a gig, or like at home like that? Do you feel any more butterflies or anything?
I mean, with certain things, but it's more of like excitement, less nerves and more excitement. I thought I was going to be really stressed that day. And then on the day I just wasn't.
Must have been the surf.
It was the surf. Exactly. Put me in the right frame of mind. Yeah. Now, the things that make me nervous are like when you're playing new songs, especially if you have to like go play like on like a TV show or something, it's really under the microscope. You can get away with a lot in a gig because it's loud, and you've got volume and there's a lot of us on stage, and so you can, and you always make mistakes anyway, and it's just not, we're not that kind of band that it's not about the perfection of it or whatever, it's loose and it's sloppy, but in certain things, especially like TV, that's when it's like it's very under the microscope, so like and you don't have that like live feeling thing to sort of blanket over the looseness of it all.
Totally. I mean, I think I love rock and roll because it's not perfect, and I feel like those are the things that make it rock and roll.
Totally.
If it's too perfect, it's like, I don't really like that anyways.
Right. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a time and a place for that sort of thing, but we're not Steely Dan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to circle back because we were kind of talking about surfing, then we went the other way. But I mean, it's so true. Every time, like even for me, like surfing's become my job, and so there's other stuff like that I associate with that now, especially being on tour and kind of like obligations and that stuff. Probably similar, I guess, to what you said about music. It's like your first love, but then it becomes your job and your livelihood. So it naturally like collects baggage, maybe. Yeah. But still, no matter what, for me, I always I would come home and the best thing for me to do would be to go surf with my dad and my brother. Right. And just that headspace that it puts you in. And I just think it's so hard to put into words what surfing does. And like for me, it's just being in the ocean, really. Yeah. Like I could go, sometimes I'll be like, the waves are flat and I won't surf for a week. And I'm kind of like, I start feeling kind of weird and like itchy. I get like a little bit agitated easier. Yeah. And I'm like, I just go for a paddle or I just go jump in the ocean. I'm like, oh my God, why haven't I been doing this every day?
Totally. And that's a funny thing too, is I feel like, especially with my schedule when we're touring a lot, because you'll have long stretches where you're not, you're touring the Midwest or something where there is no surf option. And then you come home for a week and there's no waves and you're busy and you're trying to catch up on stuff and you don't ever get to the beach. And then you leave again for 2 weeks and all of a sudden you can go like, fuck man, I haven't been in the ocean for like 3 months. It's been a minute, and all of a sudden you feel kind of disconnected from it. And you realize like, man, I'm not even like looking at Surfline anymore. Like, I'm not even like it's weird with it, how it can just, I can get, it's this thing that I love so much, but I can get disconnected from it real quick in a weird way. And I almost have to have to make the effort to reconnect. And then every time you do, you're like, why am I not just doing this every single chance I get. You know what I mean?
Well, maybe by the next time you do the Midwest, there'll be like 8 wave pool stops along the way, and you can tie it in.
For real. I mean, it's coming, right?
Yeah, it seems like it. I know you were down at, we were talking before we started, at the New Kelly pool in Dubai.
We surfed in the last couple of months. We surfed Waco, the New Kelly pool in Dubai, and the Urban Surf in Melbourne. So we've just been hitting a bunch of them. And they're all different. They all have their like unique characteristics and everything. And yeah, it's been really fun. But that, I mean, how amazing would that be if you know, every 500 miles or so that a town put one of those in?
It'd be pretty rad. We need like a Chris Shiflett wave pool music surf night.
Yes. Yes, we do.
That'd be a pretty good fit at the surf ranch up there.
I know. I'll tell you, I think that they said,
Kelly, make it happen.
At the one in Abu Dhabi, I think that they have some sort of gig facility thing that they're building into it. Yeah.
No way. So,
yeah.
Did any of the other guys in the Foo surf?
None of the other guys in the band, although Nate did come to the Slater one in Abu Dhabi with us and gave it a go. Nate's like you know, he snowboards and is mountain bikes, and it's just generally like, you know, an outdoorsman. So he'll give it a paddle every now and again, but it's not something that he does regularly. But there's one dude, we always laugh about it. There's one dude on our crew, my buddy Tim Fly, who you might know. He's from Laguna.
Sounds familiar.
And he has worked with us for years. He grew up with Taylor, and they were like best friends. And he's a ripping surfer. And we have only ever surfed in wave pools together. In all the years that we've known each other, somehow we've never actually gotten into the ocean. And he's on our crew, and so like on days when we're like have a day off in Byron, they're like loading into the gig in Brisbane, stuff like that. So it's like it just over and over for like 15 years or something. It has never lined up that we surf in the ocean together, but we surfed like inland, and we surfed Waco, and like the Urban Surf, and all these other ones. So it's funny.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's rad.
I know.
At least you got one buddy on tour.
I know. Yeah.
What's it like on touring now? I know you're telling me a little bit like it's way more family oriented, obviously. Like, do you all have kids? And
yeah.
So do you bring the family mostly, or I mean, your kids are like probably in high school now?
Yeah, it's funny because now my kids are getting pretty grown. Like my oldest is in college.
Oh, damn, college.
Yeah. So we bring them in mostly in the summertime. Like a Foo Fighters summer tour, especially if it's like over in Europe, tends to be the one that, because we're always over there in the summers, and it's like summertime for festivals and stuff like that. And that seems to be the one that everybody brings their kids to, you know. Nice. Or if you go and like do like Saturday Night Live or something, like, you know, everybody brings their families out for stuff like that. But yeah, we bring them out as much as we can.
Nice.
And then the other side of that is we're just not away for big long stretches, you know.
Yeah, what is kind of like a normal run now for you?
Normal's like a week or two.
Oh,
and
that's
sometimes,
it.
Yeah, and sometimes if we're like around the West Coast, we might even hub. You know, we might even like fly to Denver and back, and San Francisco to back, and you know, and so you're like wind up coming home every night, like if it works out, you know.
Yeah.
But this last one, you know, was maybe like 3 weeks long. That was like a pretty long one. You know, like I got home. My wife was like, God, that felt like you were gone for a long time. I'm like, I know. It's kind of like old school.
And that was down to Australia?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
And do you guys, I mean, that was, how many shows would that have been?
Well, I think it was, if you throw in the Abu Dhabi show, it was, I think 6 or 7, something like that. Because in Australia, it's all the cities are so far apart, and you got to move the gear and then set it up. And so you wind up having 2 or 3 days off between shows.
Totally. Do you like doing a run, or would you rather be like at home and just fly for single nights and stuff?
No, I like doing a run.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have the option to fly home, I always do it. But then you're just like, you never get a good night's sleep. You know what I mean? It's like you're sort of out of it at home, and then you're out of it at the show. And so yeah, I kind of like, if we're gonna be gone, I just like being gone.
Yeah.
You know?
That's cool. Kind of getting.
I just don't like being gone too much.
Yeah,
You know
for
that?
sure.
Yeah.
I know it's great. I'm sure, like for me too, after doing the tour for a long time, now it feels so nice to be home. Whereas like when you were saying when you were a kid, and just the dream was to be on the road for as long as possible. And at some point in your life, that probably flip-flopped with the having kids and stuff, huh?
It's funny, yeah. I almost can't believe it myself how much of a homebody I am, versus what my life was 25 years ago or something, you know what I mean? But that's what happens when you have kids. Like, it just, your focus totally shifts. I was, like the cliche sleep till noon or 1 every day kind of musician dude for a long time, and then you have kids, and that's just not an option anymore. And you're up when they're up. So whatever time that is, you're up in the dark and you're going. And so, you're asleep at 9 o'clock or whatever, it's funny now, because now when I go on tour, that's like the hardest part. Is like, oh fuck, I gotta stay up till 1 a.m. Really?
For sure. Yeah.
Like, if we could play at like 6 at night, I'd be like, let's go.
Totally. Yeah. And so you're playing Santa Barbara here the next couple of nights. That'll be fun with your band.
Yeah.
When did you start doing that?
Well, this is officially the 3rd year in a row at doing it at Soho, but I actually did a sort of a smaller version of it the year before at my friend's bar out in Goleta. That was the first year that I was like, man, we should turn this into like an annual thing, because it's just great. Like, we have a place up in Santa Barbara, but I don't spend as much time up there as I would like, and it's just good to have a reason to just be anchored for around the holidays up there,
Yeah, for sure.
And we always kind of wind up being up there around this time of year. So, and it's just nice because, all my friends have moved away and live all over. And then I got my friends that are still there and everything. And it's just a good excuse to get everybody together and see friends. And the shows have kind of grown and evolved over the last few years. And so we're doing it 2 nights this year, and with a great, pretty stacked lineup, like with some old friends and some new friends. And I'm stoked. I just found out last night that they both sold out.
Sick.
That's always nice it's kind of the goal. Sell it out in advance,
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm fired up.
Takes the edge off. Now you can just relax and enjoy it,
Yeah. And you've been doing like kind of a solo gig for about the same time, like 3 years now?
Yeah.
Or longer?
I started doing I had a band called Jackson United years ago that was kind of a solo thing, but it was like, I just didn't want to call it Chris Shiflett or whatever, because I don't know, I just didn't, it just felt like weird.
Yeah.
But over time I sort of realized just how hard it is to keep a band together when it's not full time. And also at a small level, and so at a certain point, I just started calling my stuff that I was doing sort of outside of Foo's, just started calling it my own name. And then and the lineup sort of shifts. Although the guys that I've been playing with now, we've been playing together for a while. So yeah, it's been something that's just kind of like evolved, and sometimes I go out and do it just me and an acoustic guitar. Sometimes we've done it as just me and my drummer, last year, because everybody in my band got COVID.
Oh, no.
So we were like, what are we going to do? Yeah. And we didn't want to cancel it. So luckily that is not happening this year. It will be the full strength band.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it's rad. I mean, it's such a departure from what you're playing in the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
And what I was kind of curious, because like you grew up, I mean, like No Use for a Name, all like most of your bands were more like rooted in rock and roll and punk rock, and then you're in the Foos. So what point did you get into more country music and blues and that sort of stuff?
I always loved old music. I've always been drawn to old, 50s rock and roll and 60s rock and roll and stuff like that. Especially the 50s stuff, the early rockabilly stuff was pretty similar to country music at that time. It was kind of born out of country music, really, like that early stuff. But it was when I was in No Use for a Name. It was actually Tony from No Use for a Name was the guy that really hipped me to like a lot of the like Uncle Tupelo and bands like that. And that was kind of where I sort of started. And then it just spread out from there in every direction, like went back and sort of got into just all the obvious stuff, Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, all the old school classic country. and worked my way through all those kind of eras, Buck Owens and Merle Haggard and Waylon and Hank Jr., just all the stuff, Keith Whitley and at the same time, all the sort of evolving Americana stuff, Jason Isbell and Sturgill Simpson, just all that stuff, Chris Stapleton. Like I love all that, Lucinda Williams, and there's so many great artists, and that has just became something, not unlike when I got into surfing, it was like where you just kind of go all in on something. You just go deep dive. I want to find out, okay, I love Steve Earle. Well, who did Steve Earle listen to? He listened to Townes Van Zandt. Well, now I got to go check that out. Well, who was he listening to? And just keep kind of diving deeper and deeper into it. And that has more and more over the years influenced the sort of the music that I make.
Rad. I could relate to it. I've always loved old music too. My dad grew up just playing 99.9 and was all and 95.9. So it was all classic rock. And so I just gravitated straight towards that. And I remember when I started playing, the first band that I really was of the Stones and the Allman Brothers.
Oh man.
And so I did that. I was like, okay, well the Stones, who'd they? Oh, Graham Parsons, Graham Parsons, and it was oh my God.
Well, that was a huge influence because I grew up with the Stones and I didn't think of that era like Exile on Main Street. And so I didn't listen to those records thinking it was country music. Understanding that connection. But I kind of got that later, and same deal. Well, who's Graham Parsons? And oh, what was great? And you listen to some of that old Graham Parsons recordings, you're like, oh, he's doing a George Jones song. Well, who's George Jones? You just the tentacles just go forever.
Yeah, music's so cool like that. I know, it's so fun.
Totally, and all the stuff too that like you said, Allman Brothers, like Skinner, and just all that. It's so steeped in country and blues and rock and roll. It's just it's all in there.
Yeah.
There's. I always think there isn't that much distance between all those genres, except for guitar tone.
Totally.
You know what I mean? It's make it a little crunchier, it becomes AC/DC. Lighten it up a little, it becomes Buck Owens or something. It's all kind of rooted in the same stuff.
For sure. Yeah, it's such simple, good music, and it's crazy. I trip out on it because it seems like that whole genre, of kind of, some people ask me what kind of music I'm like, I don't really know what to call it, but you mentioned Sturgill and Jason Isbell, Tyler Childers. I've been listening to Turnpike Troubadours a lot. Yeah. Their new album I really like, but it's rad to see that all kind of coming back, but also how new artists can make music out of something that's so basic and been around for so long, but it's still you still want to hear it. You're not I've already heard this, Yeah. I find that super interesting.
Well, that's kind of like when that first Sturgill record came out, where it's how is this dude able to take these same three chords that have been, it's you've heard that chord progression so many times and make it sound fresh and brand new. And I mean, that's kind of the magic of it, of music. That's the beauty of it. It's the hard part too,
And the emotion, the storytelling. It's everyone puts their own twist on it.
The lyric and the whole thing, Yeah.
It's so fun. Are you a Fender or Gibson guy, or?
I have a Fender signature model, actually.
I thought that, but then I noticed at the show you played a Les Paul quite a bit.
Well, yeah, I kind of play everything.
Yeah.
And it's funny that I wound up being having a Fender signature model because my only guitar that I had growing up was a Les Paul.
Yeah.
And it was just that for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I sort of, as I got more into there was a point where I started getting more into Telecasters and stuff. And then my signature model was kind of born out of that. I want to have a Telecaster that's works in the Foo Fighters. So it's got to have hot pickups and humbuckers and all that sort of stuff. But, yeah. So, but Fender doesn't they're not you can only play our stuff, that was one of the first things they ever said to me when we were putting together, play whatever you want, but just, if you can work this in here and there, that'd be cool too.
Totally. That's so funny. It's so different than surfing. If I had a signature surfboard and I went over to someone else and got more boards, they're what are you doing?
Right.
Yeah, well, fully exclusive.
I watch how surfers get paid, so I know all about those things now.
That show's pretty good.
It is really interesting. I love all that. I think that's the beauty of so much sort of podcasting and modern, whatever content stuff you want to call it. It's to get that kind of inside baseball stuff on something you don't have any personal experience in. It's that's why people like all that. I think like probably most of the people that watch my guitar show aren't guitar players. You know what I mean? It's just like hearing people that are maybe have some expertise or whatever in whatever subject it is, kind of go deep into the weeds on it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I always think about that, like 15, 20, even when I was a kid, like growing up surfing, you didn't know anything about these people that you idolized, except for maybe like you'd get a magazine, like, oh, wow, look at that. Yeah. Oh, Kelly said that, or, oh, Andy, this or that, and
totally.
Now with social media and podcasts and YouTube and this and that, I mean, there's so much out there. You feel like you can know someone without even ever meeting them.
Totally. I mean, that's like, what your heroes had for lunch that day, as opposed to like, when I was a kid, being into music, if you were into like it's something that was even remotely underground, you never even knew what those people looked like half the time, unless there was a picture on the record, or if they happened to come through your town. It was all like, in a weird way, and I don't want to be like grandpa yelling at people on the lawn or whatever, like that thing. But there was a mystery to that is like, it's kind of sad that that's gone now.
Yeah, like that mystique, I feel like is, I know it is a little.
But I'm like as big an offender as anybody, because I'm like posting on my Instagram all the time, like, hey, I'm in the van, yippee, so yeah.
What because I'm kind of a nerd, I guess, when it comes to music and like going all in. What are you playing mostly these days, gear wise?
Ooh, that's a big question. So there's my Foo Fighter rig, and then there's the rig that I have in my solo thing, and they're quite different. In Foos, I've got a big amp setup where it's basically like I have a Friedman, 2 Friedman half stacks, which is like the BE, whatever it is, the brown eye head.
Friedman. Okay, I've never even heard.
It's
of
basically
Friedman.
it's like a kind of a boutique-y Marshall.
Okay,
more or less. It's in that family of guitar tone. Like a revved up Marshall, and then so AB between that and an AC30 that are also 2 half stacks. So I bounce between those, and then and I have I had Dave Friedman build me this sick pedal board that with an RJM switcher that's amazing, and so God, I don't even know what's on my pedal board in Foos these days, but there's definitely like a Klon on there, and just all the bells and whistles, flanger, phaser, lots of delays, all that stuff. And guitar wise, it's, I play my signature model a lot, my Fender, and then the sort of fancy version of that they made for me as well.
Which is, I noticed when you were playing, not to cut you off, but because we were talking about Les Pauls, and then you wanted a Fender that you could sort of model. So it's got 2 humbuckers on it, huh?
The production version has 2 humbuckers. Then there's like a sort of a master built version of it that has 2 P90s.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I started using a lot of guitars with P90s in the last, 10 years or so. I like the way those pickups sound. I especially like it in Foos because Dave and Pat generally are playing humbuckers, and so it's kind of a nice little way to cut a little different, So, and then, I bought like earlier this year, I just bought like a vintage BC Rich Mockingbird that is fucking great, like a guitar that I've sort of dreamed about for a long time, and finally got my hands on one of those. I've been playing that. Lots of Les Pauls, Explorers, Flying Vs, 335s, like just all that stuff,
Sick.
Yeah. In my solo thing, last night was the first night that I've ever played with it, but I got this Neural Quad Cortex amp simulator that is mind-blowing, dude. You can't believe all the sound that's in this thing. It's just insane. So that's been really fun to mess around with. I had been using a Strymon Iridium and just set it up on my pedal board with all my pedals. Now I've got this other thing where it's all in this little unit, just this small little contained unit, and it just sounds ridiculous. And I mostly play Telecasters, like traditional Telecasters with like a single coil.
Cool.
So I've got like a Blackguard custom shop one, and then this funky Paisley one that I play mostly in that.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's that one's cool. I actually just bought a real one of those.
Oh,
an
yeah?
actual 68.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, but I'm afraid to take it on the van tour because
Yeah.
I'm afraid it's going to get hurt. But I think I'm going to have to throw it in the van for one of these things. But and sometimes I'll bust out. I just started playing my Les Paul in my solo thing too because I love the way a Les Paul sounds when you're playing like country, either country or country rock kind of stuff. Sure. It sounds great on a Les Paul.
And what amps are you playing mostly on the solo gig?
Well, that's in that quad cortex thing. It's really interesting because I have it set up where every song I program a preset
man. It's going over my technical.
I know
brain.
it's going over my technical brain. I believe you me. I have a couple friends that I have to call like every day. I'm like, how do you do X, Y, and Z? But I'm slowly figuring it out. So every song is a preset, right? And then within that, you can have scenes where you set it up like intro, verse, chorus, solo. Right? So then you can kind of like, maybe for the intro you have a boost on, and then for the verse you put a phaser on, and so you can do these kind of like scene changes within the song, which is amazing.
Crazy.
And so I've pretty much mostly rely on the same stuff. Like when I go out and tour with a real amp, I'm usually bringing either a deluxe reverb or a Princeton reverb. For my solo thing. One of those things. Sometimes I'll use like a Vox AC15 or something like that, but it's always something in that sort of range. So with this quad cortex thing, he'd use them all. Like for one song, I'll have it be a deluxe reverb. For the next song, it's a Princeton. For the next song, it's a Marshall Plexi. For the next song, it's a Matchless. You know what I mean?
And this is a super stupid question. Do you even need an amp for that, or can you just run it straight through?
You can run it straight through. Right now I'm using a little powered speaker on stage because it's a little weird because I've done it without anything coming off the stage.
Yeah.
And I feel like the people right down front are maybe not being served well with that because if you think about it, when you're right in front of the stage, the PA speakers are kind of out here.
Totally.
And maybe you're not getting enough guitar and bass. So we're kind of trying to work that out. And last night, no joke, in Templeton at this place was the first time we ever used this setup. And it was great. It seemed to work really well. It sounded great from what I could tell by the Instagram videos.
Yeah. Does it feel different, like to not be standing in front of an amp that's like raw, like pushing air behind you?
It does, but we're all on in-ears. Oh. So it's like being beamed right into your brain. It's weird. It's definitely, and there's a lot of people debate this, like if I had the means for my solo thing, my solo thing operates at a very small level. So I'm up there connecting cables and I just kind of more DIY because it's not like it's a big thing with a big budget and a huge crew and all that stuff. So I'm always I try to keep it streamlined and I try to keep it because it's going to be me humping it in and out of the van. So I just want it to be as simple. It's getting a little not very simple right now, to be perfectly honest. Because that's just one part of it. Then we have this track rig and we just got this new in-ear monitor rig where we control our in-ears ourselves, and there's an insane amount of it's not very simple anymore, but so that's what we really need. We need a guy to operate all that stuff. But the reason that I do that is because of exactly that, you're playing in different venues all the time and in very different setups, and there's no consistency with it, and that's the thing that drives me nuts, especially on in-ears. And I love in-ears for singing. If I got to sing, I want to be on in-ears because it just helps a lot. But it's that every night, the power hitting your amp different, the local front of house person sending it different and EQing it different, and all that thing. It just drives me crazy to not. What I really want at my old age is consistency. You know what I mean? And that's what those things give you, like the amp simulator. It's it's going to be the same freaking thing.
A ton of control, huh?
A ton of control, and to make it exactly where you want it to be. And then just to have that range of you could literally from song to song, part to part, have it be just about any sound you want.
It's crazy. Yeah. And dialed in already to how you want it. And boom, by the click of a button.
But it's funny with all the tech stuff, there's this muscle memory thing that you have to then learn. And I don't have that part of it wired at all, man. I had some crazy flounders last night. Just epic turning off the amp accidentally on the wrong foot switch and just all that kind of stuff, man. There's like with every new thing, there's like it's funny because I've got, I've been playing in bands since I was 14. So I've like, whatever that is, 40 years almost of like muscle memory around that. And when things go wrong, you have your ways, your well-worn ways of dealing with different situations. And you add this new tech stuff into it, and all that goes out the window. So when something goes wrong, you're like lost. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're like a beginner again. Like, what do I do? Exactly. Just start kicking stuff. Oh, man. Hope it works.
Classic. What are you going to use at the Santa Barbara shows?
I'm going to use that stuff. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
I'm fired up to hear it.
Don't worry, I have a real amp for you. You don't have to deal with any of that stuff.
Oh man, I know it's just the tiny bit that I've like played little gigs or jumped up for songs with people.
Yeah.
I trip out on that too. It's like my amp sounded like that at home, and I had this tone that I liked, and then I put it on a stage next to someone else's amp. I'm like, oh, it doesn't work anymore.
Oh, dude, yeah.
It's like that tone that I liked is just out the window.
Oh yeah, when you have other musician, other sounds coming, and then just different rooms, and then the difference between the way it sounded at sound check and the way it sounds when the room is full of people. It's like,
and everyone starts turning up a little bit, or like the guy puts you low in the mix. You can't even hear yourself anymore. It's crazy.
It's funny, even with that quad cortex thing I was talking about. Like I dialed in all the tones on headphones at my kitchen table, not realizing that it's totally different in the room. And like my Foo Fighter guitar tech, Mark, was like, oh no, dude, you got to do that with the headphones off. You got to have like a powered speaker and hear what it sounds like in the room. Wow. And he was so right. Like it's so different.
Trippy.
Yeah. Because you tend to go to like way too wet, and then you have way too much reverb on everything. And then you play it in the room and it's you just get lost
like soup,
in it.
Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Less is always better with a lot of like delays and I mean depending on what the genre and what you're going for. Yeah. But yeah, for like rock music, it's real easy to have way too much reverb and delay and stuff, just get real washy.
Totally.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh yeah, Chris. Well, thanks so much. I guess we should, I wanted to let people know where they can find everything that you're up to too. Cause I know you got the Shred with Shifty.
Yeah. So
your podcast.
Yeah. So I'm not really doing Walking the Floor these days.
Okay.
I kind of put that on, I don't like to think of it as being over, just maybe on hiatus for a while. Cause this Shred with Shifty thing is taking up like all my time basically right now. It's like in a good way, but it's but I can't really do both at the same time. So there's Shred with Shifty, which you can find on volume.com/shifty. I have a pretty new album out called Lost at Sea. That's wherever you stream music, and then doing shows here and there, and then with Foos we're like maybe halfway through touring the new record, something like that. So we've got through well into next year of lots and lots of shows coming up. So there's all that stuff too.
Epic.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then you can find me at Hammond's or Rincon, Emma Wood, with Connor here. Yeah, paddle blocking for me.
Hopefully we're surfing around
Give me
Christmas.
some pro tips.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, dude. Thanks so much for coming on and being the guinea pig.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Hopefully I didn't drive you nuts. Ask you too many dumb questions.
Yeah, it was so good.
Super fun. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, right on.